Hello. So today we're going to be looking at some of the comments you guys left me. I'm going to make these types of videos often because the whole point of this channel is just to spark more conversation about behavior, evolution, neuroscience, psychology, whatever. So I think it's important for me as someone who isn't as qualified as a professor to not talk down to people or just take whatever I say as dogma and instead have good conversations with my community. So we're going to take a look into that now. I'm going to be looking at all the comments from YouTube. I do have a TikTok and Instagram for this account, but there hasn't really been any comments. First, I want to say that what I'm going to do with these comments is look at them, and if it's a dispute or a claim, I'm going to see if that holds any weight. And if I agree or disagree and why. If it's just a general comment, we can just react to it, I guess. There isn't that many comments, so this video might be short, but hopefully in the future there's more. I hope to do this weekly, but who knows how fast my channel will grow. Also, I do comment on my posts with other accounts that I have just to spark conversation, so I won't respond to those. So the first comment we're going to be looking at comes in from my first short I've ever posted. Now, I'm not sure if you can hear, but there's geese. Hold up. You know, maybe a question we can do in the future is, why do geese bark? Anyways, it comes from my first short. If you haven't seen my first short, here's some context. Humans are uniquely sociable. In fact, we're the most cooperative species in the whole world. Given this, it makes sense that love would be such a positive thing for us. For solitary animals, happiness could look a lot different, and since happiness isn't an evolutionary need, there's no guarantee that any other animal has it at all. Essentially, the message I'm getting at here is that it makes sense for love to occur in social species because it helps get them bonded to each other and helps them be more social, which evidently helps them survive, or else it wouldn't be so heavily selected for in that species. So what I'm saying is that for solitary species, love might not really exist because there's no point of love. For species that rarely meet up and mostly just to mate, there would be no reason to have any form of love there because it would get in the way of allowing them to live alone effectively. One point I say in this clip, though, is that humans are the most cooperative species in the world, with the purpose of adding on to the support that we probably feel love the most. And this is kind of a cheat. I commented on my other account and then somebody replied to that. So we're going to be looking at the reply to that comment. So I commented, if humans are so cooperative, why do we have so many wars? Which is a valid question because we don't see large-scale fighting among species like we do in humans. We do see this in chimps, where they'll walk around a territory in groups, and any chimp that they see that's not in their territory, they all just pounce on them and kill them. You can say that's somewhat like a war because it's a group fighting, but at the very least, it's interesting that that occurs. Green Alloy Liquid comments, when we are super capable of being cooperative, we also have the capability of doing the opposite. Now, I did reply to this already, but basically what I got at was, it's interesting because even though he's saying we also have the capability of doing the opposite, referring to wars, it's funny how wars are just large-scale cooperation still, though. So it's not necessarily the opposite. If anything, it's more because it's just more and more people working together, but what they are working towards is non-cooperation with another group. So it's essentially cooperative non-cooperation. And it's funny that basically the biggest moments of cooperation in history, you know, cooperation that spans multiple countries working together, is just to fight other people, which is totally different from how we view cooperation in our day-to-day life, which is, you know, happy, fun, work together, all that stuff. So it's just fun to think about. Okay, the next comment we have is also on this video. Audible. I wonder if he works for the company. He says, we are happy because we see what goes on and we aren't experiencing that horror. When we experience a horror, go somewhere that doesn't have a horror and is nice. The bar for happiness is different, and we are happy for the simple reason of not experiencing any more of that horror, as well as a few different aspects. So long as there are horrors we are aware of and not experiencing, we will be happy-ish. So I feel like there's a lot to unpack here. So first he says, we are happy because we see what goes on and we aren't experiencing that horror. So He's inherently saying that we need to be able to compare our situations to others to be happy. Now, this is a form of philosophy. I do not remember what it's called. I'm really not going to do a lot of research for this video, if any, because I want this to be more off the dome. But I know there are some people who believe this. I personally am not a huge fan, just because I immediately think of babies. We know babies can smile and laugh and giggle at a bunch of stuff. I mean, I bet if you look at a lot of the most popular YouTube shorts even of babies, they're probably smiling. Babies don't really have a concept of comparison, especially of their lives to others. I mean, I don't think any of these happy babies are looking around and saying, you know what? My life is better than that other baby's or my parents, because really, who else are they seeing? They're basically only seeing their parents. And I doubt they're appraising their parents' lives and then also thinking their lives are better than their parents and then being happy simply because of that. So I don't think that's fundamental for happiness. I don't think that's a requirement, at least. I guess if you wanted to combat what I just said, this person is saying we aren't experiencing that horror. So let's ignore the sees what goes on, because that's what led me to think of comparing. But when they say we aren't experiencing that horror, that could also be referring to, even if you are a baby, you can experience horrors in the form of, being scared of things or being hungry and having that bad feeling of hunger and crying because of that. Maybe being gassy or something like that. And it's kind of hard to make an argument that we experience happiness before horror, because a lot of the standard procedure is to make sure a baby's crying when they leave a womb. So if you're crying, that's probably closer to horror than it is to happiness. So maybe babies immediately have a sense of horror that they can compare happiness to, and them knowing about the horrors amplifies their happiness later on. Although I don't think that simply not experiencing horror would rob somebody the opportunity of feeling happy ever. So then the commenter says, when we experience a horror, go somewhere. I'm guessing we go somewhere that doesn't have a horror and is nice. Probably end of sentence right there. This is also true in nature. And essentially what he's describing is a negative reinforcer. Kind of like how if you touch the stove when it's hot, you're going to move your finger right away. Or if you're really, really cold, you're going to run inside or something like that. So I agree with him on this, although I think it's important to recall what we talked about before with the rats who are addicted to hurting themselves, that this isn't necessarily a law of nature. Reward systems can make people interact with things that are horrors in a way simply by dopamine-mediated compulsions. So, for example, in the rat study I just talked about, that electric shock still hurt the rats very much, but they couldn't get away from it. So it's safe to say that we won't always run away from something just because something is a horror. Here, it's really important that I touch on a possible criticism of what I just said about the rats still always interacting with the electric rod despite it being a horror. One might say that, well, you're activating their dopamine systems. That's actually pleasurable. So is it really a horror if it's activating pleasure? And to that, I would say that dopamine and pleasure are separate. There's a separation between liking and wanting. And we can see this in studies where they use a neurotoxin to basically knock out all the dopamine receptors in a rat's brain, and see that these rats still like food just as much as rats that have totally intact dopamine systems. From this, we can say that pleasure isn't reliant on dopamine, but that isn't to say that there isn't a correlation between pleasuring things and things that release dopamine, as most things that are pleasurable also release dopamine. Dopamine just doesn't cause pleasure. Additionally, if you think about humans, we kind of make ourselves experience horrors all the time for later on rewards. For example, we might hate going to work, but we love getting money. So we go to work all the time and endure that horror, which then lets us experience the pleasure of later. So again, we're not always running away from this. It is possible, though, that other animals are incapable of this because they simply don't understand the later rewards. So what would be interesting is, since this argument is inherently an argument from, pleasure or liking something, because this person is saying, since we don't like the horror, we go away from it, it would be interesting to see an experiment where they train rats to know that pressing a certain lever will give them a reward that they really, really like, but then hit them with the obstacle of, but when you press this lever, you get shocked by something, or you get something that is painful or something they don't like and see if they can still work to get this reward through the pain in the same way that a human might with work or something like this. Okay, next sentence. I'm sorry if I just blabbed on there. That might have not made like any sense. But like, I don't care. Well, I do care, but what am I going to do about it? Well, I could work more, but I don't really want to work more. More than I'm going to have to already. Okay. So then they say the bar for happiness is different, and we are happy for the simple reason of not experiencing any more of that horror. I really don't know what this person is getting at now. Hold on. Let's go word for word. The bar for happiness is different. I don't understand what it's different from. That's why this is difficult. And we are happy for the simple reason of not experiencing any more of that horror. So again, they're restating that we're happy because we're not experiencing any more of that horror, but I still don't know how the bar is different. We already talked about being happy because I'm not experiencing horror, so we'll move on to the last sentence. As well as a few different aspects of so long as there are horrors we are aware of and not experiencing, we will be happy-ish. No, this is not the case. There are many, 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 many people in America who suffer from depression, who I would say are not happy-ish even, who are very aware of all the struggles going on in different countries. I understand what this person is getting at, but the way they're saying it is a statement that sounds kind of like a fact, and this is just not the case. Knowing about things that are bad and not experiencing them will not inherently make somebody happy. You can think about things that are going on, and maybe this makes you feel a little bit better for a short amount of time, but it will overall not make you any more happy. In fact, some people, when they think about other people's struggles, they get a lot more sad, and they feel a sense of guilt that they don't have to go through the same struggles that others do. So I appreciate the comment, but I think there are some flaws. But Audible, if you disagree with me, please comment again, and I'll get to this in the next video. So the next comment also comes from a short, but this time the short is basically me setting up the argument that our wanting knows no bounds, unlike food, which is because you have a set amount of food you eat before you're full, whereas you don't really have a set amount of things you buy before you're happy or accomplishments you can get before you're happy. Wow, what is this? What the heck? Arkalarkania, I'm sorry if I butchered that, says, you need to convince yourself that some form of happiness is a form of survival in a bigger picture. And it actually is. I totally agree with this. Some forms of happiness are linked to survival, 100%. Actually, I would say most are. As I was getting at before, I think love is so pleasing because love is so beneficial for humans. And we all know that, doing stuff with your partner is also very pleasing, and this is also very beneficial for evolution in general. Additionally, it's very pleasurable to win things, get things, obtain things, and as I said in the video, this is also really good for survival. I mean, having more things is basically always going to help you in nature. Unless they're bad things, of course, but I don't think people would really argue that bad things in nature, so back when humans were evolving, were ever super pleasurable to us. For example, it's really hard to get food in nature. It's really hard to get shelter in nature. It's really hard to get anything in nature. So the more good things you can have, the better in nature. But now we're in the modern day, and now it's not really good to go and get as much as you can. For example, with food, you can go out and buy 200 bags of Cheetos, and that's horrible for your health. Whereas back in the day, getting all the food you could was probably awesome because there wasn't really enough food around realistically for you to get obese or get any horrible health conditions from it. The next comment comes from a different short of mine and criticizes me calling humans socially monogamous, or what other animals have, social monogamy. Specifically, they say, the thing is, you calling it social monogamy, but animal social I'm guessing they meant to say your. The thing is, you're calling it I'm guessing they meant social monogamy. The thing is, you're calling it social monogamy, but animal social monogamy ends after the chicks of the nest. There are animals that are bound by love, like swans or foxes. The thing is, animals like humans are not biologically meant to have one partner. Social groups were bigger in history, and genes were spread widely. You can't compare sentient beings like humans with strictly hormonal-driven animals like birds. I think this is a very fair comment. I think this person definitely has some good scientific insight, and I really appreciate it. Because this one's also long, we're going to break it down sentence by sentence. So first, the thing is you're calling it social monogamy, but animal social monogamy ends after the chicks of the nest. I would respond to this, but I feel like in the next sentence they contradict themselves in a way that kind of says my point for me. There are animals that are bound by love, like swans or foxes. So, I mean, this person's essentially saying that monogamy in a loving sense can't exist after chicks of the nest, but then lists 2 examples of that happening. Now, I don't really know that much about swans or foxes, so I don't know if they're actually socially monogamous, but I'm guessing they are. I'm going to take this person's word for it. I'm kind of wrongly using all the cultural media of swans being so synonymous with love as proof of him being right, or them. But I don't really know. I will say that a lot of scientific published articles do refer to what birds have as social monogamy. If you want to argue what the definition of social monogamy is, then you can do that. But that wasn't really the point of the video, and I'm not really an expert on what classifies as social monogamy or not. But I do know that the birds I talked about are biparental, which parenting was basically the crux of my argument. So them being socially monogamous for life isn't really necessarily important, because I then used that to tell the story of why we tested it in humans. And if it's shown in humans, then it's shown in humans. And my whole point is just about humans. It doesn't really matter if birds don't, although they do. The next thing they say is, the thing is, animals like humans are not biologically meant to have one partner. This, I think, is kind of an overstatement. The thing is that there is animals that do show only having one partner throughout their whole life. And there are many, many, many humans that only have one partner throughout their whole life, whether that be in modern day or historically as well. Now, I know this isn't touching on the fact that they say biologically meant, but for me, I feel like if you can see such a consistent amount of beings only being with one person, then would you say they're biologically not meant to have that? What does that even mean? I mean, all we are and all that we do are just manifestations of biological processes that we already have going on. Yeah, sure, there are also many, many, many humans that don't just have one partner, but that doesn't mean that there aren't humans that only have one partner. We can think of humans as socially monogamous species because once reproduction happens, we typically see that people parent. Humans don't necessarily have one sexual partner throughout their whole life, but in my opinion, that's because we've made sex a completely different thing. For example, we have recreational sex, which isn't very common in the animal kingdom. Once we do have a kid with somebody and it's time to parent, a lot of these people, even though they've had partners in the past, will settle down with that one person, leading me to believe that humans are socially monogamous. I mean, it takes 2 to parent a kid, and if you don't have a mother and a father in a kid's life, they're at way higher risk for mental health issues and even just physical health issues in general. I mean, it all kind of points to humans being socially monogamous, but there is an argument that we aren't monogamous. In my opinion, I kind of think we're almost omnivorous in a way. What I mean by this is that there are animals that are carnivorous and animals that only eat plants, like herbivores. But then there are animals that can do both. In the same way, there are animals that are monogamous and there are animals that are polyamorous. And I think humans can do both. I think we're sexually omnivorous. So to say that humans aren't biologically meant to have one partner, I understand that we have the means to have more than one partner, and that especially men can go around and just impregnate a bunch of people. It's just not really what always happens throughout history. In fact, I responded to this in the comment section and I said, I think humans can go either way depending on the person, as it'd be hard to imagine us making monogamous societal norms if we weren't at least somewhat monogamous beings. The next claim they make is that social groups were bigger in history. Again, I just think this is false. I mean, in history, like they had a community, they had a tribe, whatever you want to call it. But in the modern world, we see giant countries. I mean, do you think there were historically bigger groups of humans than the 300 million people that make up America today, or the over 1 billion people that make up China? I mean, I know all these people aren't necessarily working together all the time, but they all exist under their own governments. So I don't know. I just think this is wrong. I do, though, agree with the fact that genes were spread widely. This just happens. The last thing they say is that you cannot compare sentient beings like humans with strictly hormonal beings like birds. I think the word they meant to use here is conscious instead of sentient, as the definition of sentience is just being able to perceive and feel things, which any animal with a brain can basically do. Now, the argument for if other animals have consciousness is actually pretty compelling, and I don't really have an answer for you, nor does hardly anybody. I do find it kind of hard to believe that animals, especially animals with very advanced brains, don't have some form of consciousness. Maybe it's not something exactly like human consciousness, but it might be consciousness nonetheless. Just like how animals don't have human feeding behaviors or human reproductive behaviors, but they're still reproductive and feeding behaviors nonetheless. I also disagree with the notion that they are strictly hormonal beings. I understand what you mean, but I'm very nitpicky with words, and I think it would just be more accurate to say that they are guided by hormones. Because at the end of the day, if you just have hormones without anything to interpret hormones, like a brain or something, nothing's going to happen. I think hormones guide behavior and bias an animal towards doing something, but I think at the end of the day, it's the brain that actually gets them to do the behavior. The last comment is kind of a silly one, but I just wanted to include it anyways. In response to the short we talked about earlier, where I talked about happiness not being a necessity to evolving a species, John QC6OF says, "It's the language and the meaning of words. Nothing you are saying makes any sense. Happy is just not always enjoyable, okay? Got it, you lame brain nitwit." It's kind of funny that this person is saying none of what I'm saying makes any sense, because literally none of what they're saying makes any sense. I don't even know how to react to this. It's just funny. I just like it. I always appreciate any comment. So thank you, John. I do think there is merit to happy is just not always enjoyable, which is you don't have to enjoy something to be happy with it, which I think is maybe the state of being content with something. Maybe there's not something specifically you're enjoying, but you're happy. But it's the language and the meaning of words. I don't understand what you're really getting at. Maybe you can elaborate more, but yeah. Anyways, this has been a really fun video to make. I like these long form, not super serious videos. If you have any comments you want to leave that I'll react to, please drop in the comment section and like and subscribe.